Hey everyone, welcome to Design 113. This is our last week. We're going to be going over how to do the final project. We're going to be talking about how to set up grids on our assignment. We're going to be talking about the contrast, repetition, alignment, and proximity design principles. We call them the CRAP or CARP design principles. And we're going to be talking a little bit about what is going to be on the final project. I'll go into quite a bit of detail when it comes to the final project, but let's first start out by talking about what you're going to need to expect to know. I just uploaded a new grading rubric, so I want you to check that out. Now, I just wanted to point out that the final project is worth 185 points. So this is quite a lot of points, and we are actually going to be talking about all the elements. Well, we touched on a few of the elements that you'll need to know in assignment 3, but for the final project, we are definitely going to need to buckle down and kind of rehash these principles. So I'm going to start the video and kind of say hello to everyone who's out there, and I'll be talking about what you're going to need to know for the multi-page layout. There's a video posted in your final project assignment that will tell you exactly kind of how to lay out grids. It's going to, in preparation for this project, I really want you to watch it. It's only 12 minutes. It's got some great tips on how to lay out an article in InDesign. If you're new to this, I definitely want you to check it out. And let's see. Okay, so we've got Jenny today. Thanks for coming. This project is going to allow you to visually demonstrate your understanding of what you've learned over the entire mod. So regarding typography, this mod is going to include utilizing letter form to create positive and negative space. It's going to allow you a little bit more creativity. With each assignment, you're going to be allowed to do a little bit more creativity. You're going to use a word and paragraph structure to create visual meaning and basic typesetting. So all those typesetting exercises we've been practicing, we're going to now put them into play. It's also going to introduce you to an understanding of designing with a grid system. I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with grids or if you've worked with them before, but we're going to have a little intro into how to set that up in your final project. You're going to be required to design a 2-page magazine spread article covering the typeface family that you chose to research in week 2. Remember that long research paper that you wrote? You're going to be using that content for our final project. Now, if you did not meet the minimum word count, you will need to make up for that. You will need to fill in those gaps. Now, the text from your article will be the body copy of this article. So I only want you to use the font family that you're featuring for all of the text and design of the article. So if you chose to write on Helvetica, I want to see your design in Helvetica, and I want to see you use the Helvetica font throughout. I will be doing a demo on how to do the Helvetica layout and show you a few examples that are online that you can check out as well. Now, are there any questions about the final project so far? I know we just kind of touched on it a little bit. Okay, now your solution should rely only on type usage. If your report is on a font that you don't have on your computer, not all fonts on the list are available for free. I realize that, but some may have come with your computer. So choose the one that augments the one that you reported on. So what I mean by that is if you wrote on, just say Helvetica was not available on your computer, and that's what you chose to write on your paper, and you need to design something in Helvetica, but you don't have the font and you don't want to go buy the font, you can try to find another sans serif font that kind of looks similar to it and design with that one. So hopefully that helps. Jenny's got a question. Does the week 3 illustration have to be the same font as the report and final project? It's all of them. I'm not going to be a stickler about it. So technically yes, but I don't think that's even in the grading rubric. So you should be okay. As long as you just create a portrait with type and it looks great, I'm not going to be picky. But you will need your final project content for the final project. That I will be picky about. So good question from Jenny. Does that help? Great question. Yeah, so I'm only going to be real stickler about it for the final project because it does specifically say in there to do that. For the assignment 3, as long as you designed a killer typeface illustration, that's okay. It doesn't matter if you stuck with the font family. Okay, so the article you wrote in week 2 is also going to serve as an informational piece, as you're going to be presenting information regarding the history and the background of the typeface, including who designed it, why, and how it was used. This is going to be all information from your research paper, so you shouldn't have to do any work on the written side for this final project because you already did that in week 2. All you're going to need to be focusing on is the design portion if you did assignment 2. So a typographic grid, let's talk about this. This is part of your requirements. The typographic grid organizes text and images across the page of a document. You'll hear me be very picky about alignment and making sure things are lined up properly. A grid can consist of a single column framed by margins, or it may have multiple columns. You might have seen this if you open up your magazine, maybe count how many text columns you see in a certain article. And it will vary, and you can choose. But when you design a grid, you typically begin with the vertical divisions or columns, and then you add horizontal divisions, which are rows. And so I'm going to show you how to do that really quick. So if you want to pull up your InDesign, the InDesign is only to be used for the final project. So just want to make you aware of that. I'm going to pull up InDesign, and we're going to get our document set up. I'm going to be toggling back and forth between slides and design concepts, but I really want you to kind of bear with me. I'll go slow if you're going to be following along. Otherwise, I'll just kind of roll through this. Okay, so we've got, let me stop the share and pull up InDesign. Okay, so your specs are an InDesign document, so you'll go to File, New, and so if you want to follow along, this is how we're going to set up our final document for our final project. So I'll give you a minute to pull up InDesign. Yep, InDesign's super slow. That's okay. I'll give you a minute before I jump into it. Now, when you're pulling up your new document, you'll notice that there's a number of pages and then your start page. This is very important when you're doing your layout. So you're going to want to keep the box facing pages checked. We want that. We want them to be side by side because we're doing a magazine spread. And so we often call the spreads double tracks or a 2-page spread or 2-page layout. And so that's what we're doing. And we want them to be side by side. So this box needs to be checked. Number of pages, we only need 2. And what page are we going to start on? We're going to start on page 2. So you want to make sure that this is set up and this looks just like this on the top portion of the document preset. Next is the page size. Standard 8.5 by 11, that's all you need. And then you can choose page size letter and it should fill in the gaps, or you can manually type it in. Obviously we need the portrait layout, that's the orientation we want. No horizontal layouts, please. And then here's where you get to choose your columns. So remember we talked about columns. You need a minimum of 2 of a 2-column grid, but you can choose what would suit your layout. I'm gonna go, as I add the columns, you'll see it change because I've got this preview box checked here below. So if I click the arrow up, it will increase my columns. So it's kind of neat. Now, if your article is on the smaller side as far as word count's concerned, the more columns, the less content you'll need to fill. The wider the column, or the fewer columns, the wider they become, and the more content you'll need to fill. So if your article was on if you have a lot of content and it was on the larger side of the word count, then you'd probably recommend a smaller column grid, like 2 or 3. But I think 3 is a good column width, a good amount of columns for this article layout. So I'm going to stick with 3 for this. And then you're given very specific margin specs to include. So you'll probably want to go see the final project for these values. But the first one is the top. And before I enter in my margin values, I really want to make sure that this chain link here is clicked and broken, because what that does is if I enter in a value on the top, it's going to apply it to all of them. But when we break that link, what that does is it makes it no longer makes all the settings the same, and we don't have the same settings for all of these. So what I want to do is type in the values. So for the top, it's 0.625 inches, and you will need to type inches. For the bottom, that's 0.875 inches. And again, all these values are on the final project on your homepage, so just go there to see them. And then the outside is the same as 0.625 inches. And you can see it changing as I'm entering the value. It's kind of cool. And then the inside is 0.75 inches. Okay, so it's given me quite a wide margin line here. This purple line is the margin line, and that's going to protect our text. We're going to keep all our text within that box. And these, this gutter here is the width between your columns. So this gives us a nice amount of space, some breathing room here. All right, so with these values entered, you are almost there. You have set up your document, okay? So that's how to set up the document. Jenny, did you get that, or would you like me to go over it one more time? I'm not sure if InDesign loaded fast enough for you. Okay, perfect. So we'll just do a little recap as you're setting it up. So if we go to File, New, select Document, we'll go a little quicker this time. And you click on Number of Pages. It's going to be 2 and 2. Start page will be 2. We want facing pages selected. And the width, or page size, we want it to be letter. So your width and height should be 8.5 by 11. Or if it's in picas, this is the value that you'll see. Orientation should be portrait, never landscape for this. Number of columns, you can choose how many columns you'd like to add. I'm going to pick 3. With a 1 pica gutter, I think that's perfectly standard and normal. I think that's good, so just kind of eyeball it. And the margins, again, we want to break this link. We do not want to make all the settings the same. We have different values for these settings. All right, so then we'll just enter it in. So 0.625 inches for the top, 0.625 inches for the outside. For the bottom, 0.875 inches. And then for the inside, it's 0.75 inches. All right, so I've got that set up, and then you'll just hit OK. All right. So there's how we set up our final project document. Now your article and spread should include all of the following components, and I'm going to highlight all of this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to paste it into my document so that I have a reminder. It's kind of like a little checklist as I'm going through my design. And I'm just going to pull it off here to the side because I want to remember everything I'm going to need. Headline, byline, I'll bring it in here so you can read it. Subheads, body copy, you're going to need a pull quote, folio page number. So that is one thing we're going to go over right now. Header or footer displaying the name of the magazine. What they want the name of the magazine to be is typography. So that's going to accompany the folio. Somewhere in your article, you must display the entire alphabet in both upper and lower case. And then you also need to have the figures 0 through 9. And what's cool about this requirement is you can use this as art for the page. And I'll show you how to do that. I found quite a few examples online, and you'll probably be able to find some too, that do typography layouts, article layouts, and really use the characters as art. No bleed and select preferences at this time. Great question. Yeah, we don't, they didn't give us any specifics, and you won't need it for this assignment. All right, so now that I've got my little checklist, I'm going to bring it in here. One of the requirements is to add a folio, a page number. This can be kind of tricky if you're working with a multi-page document like a book that has 500, 600 pages. To go and number each page would be very time consuming and very annoying. So what we do is we set up a master page, and I'm going to show you how to do that right now. If you'll go to Window, your drop-down menu, and click on Pages, I'm going to show you how to set up your folio. Now you'll notice that the grayed out pages is my spread, my 2 and 3. But if I click on the A master, double click up here, so you see it turned gray. Now it's hard to tell on my document that I'm on my master, but if you look at my pages dialog box, you'll see that I'm on that first page, or if I double click the right one, I'm now on the right A master page. But what the master, actually, do you know what master pages are used for? Are you guys familiar with how master pages work? Or is this our first introduction to them? Just curious if you've covered this in another class. A little bit. So basically master pages are just kind of like a solid template for the entire document you're about to design. It has a few elements on it that will be applied to every page. So as you add more pages, those elements get applied. It's supposed to be a huge time saver. And in this case, it's just to show you how to use. So if you double click on this A master left page, you'll notice you're on the E master left page. If you go to your type, and actually let's grab our type tool on the toolbar. You can click on T on your keyboard to bring it up. It's a kind of a shortcut, or you can click on the type tool. Yeah, and I'll show you right here. So if you go to Window and click on your pages, make sure that's checked, it will bring up a box right here, the box that looks like this. Do you see this? And then your document is page 2 and 3 down here, but your A master will be labeled, and you'll just double click on it. Okay, so you'll notice you're on your A master when it says A master and it's gray. Okay, that means that's the page you're on. If I were to click on the right page, then the right page turns gray, and that's the page I'm on. But I want to start with my left page first. And I'm going to grab my type tool, and I'm going to start right underneath. What's neat about InDesign is they have these rulers here off to the side that I can click and drag. And I'm going to line it up with my margin line. You see that? And I'm going to grab my type tool, and I'm going to just click and drag this all the way across the page. I'm going to end it right at the end of my right margin line, like this. So I've got a text box. And what I'm going to put in here is the name of the magazine, which is Typography. And then I'm going to add a page number. Sometimes you can add the date of the magazine. Doesn't really matter what you want to add. But for the name of the magazine, we'll just put it here. I'm going to format this in the font that I'm writing about. So I'm going to change it to Helvetica. And I'm going to do a regular. And the folio needs to be very small. It's just like a footer in Word. Have you ever used a header and a footer in Word documents? This is exactly the same concept. So then you'll click on, I'm going to do like 8-point font. I want it to be small, relatively small. And Jenny's asking, how did you get the cursor at the bottom of the page? So I grabbed my type tool, I clicked and dragged the text box, and I moved it down, and you'll see it blinking. Just double click in that box. And you'll know you're on the master page when you draw an element and you see this dotted line around the box. That means you're definitely on your master page. It's supposed to set the element apart. So what you'll do is you'll kind of format this. I could even make it italics if I wanted to. Like that, to kind of set it apart from my body text, because what I don't want is this to look exactly like my body text in my article. So I want it to be definitely a smaller size. I'm probably going to change the color to more of a gray, just so that it doesn't blend in with my body text. So my body text will be black, but I'll do a 60% opacity on just change it to a gray. That'll probably work. And then I just need to tab over. I'm just going to hit tab a few times until I get to the right side of my page. And this is where I'm going to put the page number. Okay, so pay attention to this part because this is how you enter in a page number. The page number is going to be, you go to type, insert special character right here, the very bottom. Then go to symbol, or I'm sorry, markers right there. And then click on current page number. And you'll notice it automatically inserts a letter. It's going to be a letter A. Why does it do that? Well, that's just a placeholder. But if you clicked on page 2 down here, you'll notice it says number 2. If I click on page, and all my left hand side pages will be, will represent the current page number. So that means that it's correctly been inserted. Now I don't want this to be italicized, so I'm going to change that to regular, and I'm going to change it to black. So I'm formatting it just slightly different. Now you can copy and paste this. I'm going to bring this over to the right side. I'm going to do one for the left. I want the page number to be on the outside. So I want this to be swapped. Kind of did the right side instead. I'll put the page number on the outside, kind of tab over. There we go. And here's another thing that I want to make sure I'm doing correctly. As I want my boxes to be on the same grid line, so I'm going to grab my ruler. And I'm going to grab my ruler on the other page. And I'm just going to make sure that those boxes line up, that they're on the same ruler line. So that's how you enter your folio page. And you'll know it worked by going to your page 2 and 3 and seeing it already formatted for you. Now you won't be able to edit those elements on this page, but you can edit them on the master page. Okay, so that is how you do the folio. So let's see what else we need. So now that I've done the folio, I'm just going to get rid of that part of the checklist. And then I just have the rest of the information to add. So I wanted to show you really quick before I get into the layout. I'm going to talk about grids a little bit and then we'll jump into the layout. But I wanted to show you a few design or typographic layouts that I found online. Here's a really cool one that I saw. This one's almost off the grid. It's kind of at an angle. This is kind of tricky to do right. You want to lay it all out horizontally first and then angle all the elements all together. Don't design at an angle. That's a trickier way to do things. But I thought this was cool because it represents the upper and lowercase letters of the Helvetica font. I thought that was kind of a neat layout. Here's another one done with the font Palatino. And this one was a cool use of the characters. They used the characters as the art on the piece of the page. By using large typographic elements, they were able to create a really cool, artistic, visually pleasing element to the page. And then they kind of laid out their article like so. And this is something you'd probably see in a magazine. This is a magazine layout that's very, very nice. And then Jenny said, is that just an image of the front to add for the front of the magazine? Nope, this would be part of this would be considered page 1. And then page 2 would have the rest of your content. So it would be for fun, but it's actually going to be as page 1. I'll show you one we're going to do. So here's an example of someone who did a page 1. They kind of used the C they used Century Gothic as the font, and they used the C, that character, and filled it with all the little lowercase and uppercase characters. And I thought that was a really cool use of, get rid of those lines, a really cool use of of art. And this was their page 1, and then page 2 had all their text. So that was kind of a neat way to sell. You'll notice that the difference between just basic typesetting exercise and magazine design is that you can take up more space with the artistic, visually aesthetic portion, and then very little of the content is used, but we use the content as kind of the structure for the article. Yeah, I did flip-flop. I made sure the page numbers were on the outside of the page. So that's how I got that. So I just kind of just switched them. Sorry, I changed things up on you. And here's one that we're going to learn to do. This can be structured as a double page spread. And I'm just going to expand this out. I do highly recommend you go to Google or find some typographic article layout that's been done. And I encourage you to copy the layout. Right now in class, it's okay to do that because it helps to copy masters. If you can do that, then you'll start getting a feel for how things kind of flow. But I'm just going to expand this because this is going to be kind of similar to the design we're going to do today. This is a cool double page spread that kind of neat. Let me see if I can get this clearer picture for you. No, it's just a small image, so it's not going to get any clearer. But this will give me a good basis for how to lay out my article. Below it, I can lay out my columns of text. Above it, I can do a pull quote. And then the white space is welcome on the left page. We want some breathing room and some space. But this has everything you need. Your uppercase letters, your lowercase letters, and it even has your 0 through 9 numbers right there. And then it just has your title. So this is a really cool way to feature the Helvetica font. So we'll do this one later. But right now we're going to stop and we're going to go over grids because this is another portion of the final project that you're going to need to know how to do. And this kind of trips up some people who aren't familiar with the grid system. So I really want to go into what your article needs to look at. Now, here is another basic 2-page spread that you could do. If it overwhelms you to tackle anything that's kind of visually complicated, that's fine. You could just do a very basic version of basic 2-page version of what we've been doing. You did a great layout for, was it the assessment 3, where you had to do your typesetting? That was page 1. You could just add a few more columns of text on another page, and then you could call that your 2-page spread. So here are the elements of a page. You'll hear me refer to these as we start laying out the article. Your header, your headline, obviously. Your byline is down here. And then your left running head is usually where you'll put the name of the magazine, kind of your header in your Word document. The folio down here is your page number. And then your left running footer is where you put typography. That's where I put it. And your pull quote is really cool. You'll notice if you read magazines, or even if you have a magazine laying around your room, just grab it and look for a pull quote. They're everywhere. They're kind of salt and peppered throughout articles. They serve 2 purposes. Visually, they break up the text because columns of text can be super boring. And in a magazine, we kind of gravitate to magazines for their visuals, their art. And so pull quotes act as kind of a piece of art in an article. So they break up that heavy, monotonous feel with the text. I know, the grand opening invitation is a totally separate thing. Yeah, you won't need the grand opening invitation for this. This is just based off of your final project paper. Last week we did a typesetting exercise where it asked you to lay out an article page, 1-page article, and so that was what I was referring to. You can even just do an extension of that if that helps make things a little easier. Okay, and then your columns. This is set. Can anyone tell me what column grid or what grid system we're using here? How many columns are we using? 3 columns, excellent. So it's based off of a 3-column grid. So each page has 3 columns. And now Jenny's asking, was that one based off of our paper we were supposed to write? Yes, that one was. Yeah, the pro and con of this class, and I don't make the assignment, so I don't have a say in how they're structured, but they do require, you know, if they take an assignment and then they kind of use it throughout the 4 weeks. So if you either miss 1 week or if you late turning an assignment, it kind of throws off everything because it's all based off of the same piece of work. But yeah, so that one was based up. No, it's great. Those are great questions, and I guarantee you're not the only one who's still trying to figure it out. So yes, this is a 3-column grid. The gutters is that white space between your columns of text. I don't want to see columns of text touching each other. Text should never run into each other or touch. They like a lot of elbow room. And think of it like an airplane. You want that arm space. It's kind of that armrest between your seats. So those rows. So the gutters is that white space that kind of keeps the text from touching each other. And I showed you how to set that up when we did our new document. The outside margin and the inside margin are right here. It's just the outside of your page, the edge of your page to where your text box will start, and the inside of your page where the text box will start. You want to leave an adequate enough amount of space between your text and the edge of the page. I saw a lot of, when we were laying out the typesetting exercise, a lot of text was running off the page or touching the edges of the page. It's a good rule of thumb to just stay within your margin line, that purple box that you see when you set up your margins. So just keep everything within that box, and then you'll have adequate, even amount of breathing room or white space on all sides of the page. Okay, look at here. I put this in red. This is a widow. While I won't be reading through your paper a second time, I will be looking for how did you structure the text? Did you proofread it? And so if I see widows and orphans, you will get docked points for that. So make sure that you are aware of how, did you give proper amount of returns in the article? Is everything kind of grouped and broken up the way it needs to be? So I will be looking for widows and orphans. So just make sure that you check that. And then the folio, make sure there's enough space between the end of your text box and the folio. We don't want them too close or touching. Okay. And then here's an image. We will not be using images or photography since this is a typographic class. We'll only be using typography for our art, but you are welcome to use your typeface illustration if the paper is, if it matches, if it's about the font that you wrote about. So if you use the font that you wrote about. So basically, if you're writing on the typeface Helvetica and you designed your typeface illustration in Helvetica, you're welcome to use that as art. So that can kind of fill in a gap if you need. Subheaders. Subheaders should be just one line. They shouldn't be, you shouldn't have them on 2 lines. They're usually all capped and then bolded so they stand out. Sometimes they're a different color than your body text altogether, and that's another way to add a pop of color and break up the columns of text. Your job here is to make your article look interesting. You want me to be drawn into it. You want to make the reader want to actually read the article. And I feel like magazine articles, if they're designed properly, just based off of the way they look, we kind of gravitate to wanting to see more of the article. Okay, the only thing this doesn't have is the intro or the kicker. We talked about that yesterday. You'll want that intro paragraph to be there, that kind of sub headline, to kind of introduce what the article is about. So this is kind of the basic version that you could do, or you can do something that's a little bit different, and I'll do a demo doing something a little bit different. Okay, so let's get into the grids. We've got a lot to cover. The function of a grid, what does it do? Basically, as you can see in that 3-column grid here, it breaks up the text for us into an easier way to read. Now, I don't know if you've used grids before, but 2 kinds of non-printing grids are available. There's the baseline grid for aligning columns of text, and a document grid for aligning objects. And we're going to be using the baseline grid, and I'm going to show you how to set that up. On the screen, a baseline grid resembles kind of like ruled notebook paper. So the concept is pretty similar. And the document grid resembles kind of graph paper. So you can customize both of the grids if you want. I'm going to see if this will let me pull in a picture. See if it'll, nope, it won't let me do it. That's okay. I'll just do a demo and show you that way. So basically, when a grid is visible, you can observe certain characteristics. The first thing is the baseline grid covers the entire spread. So I'm going to switch to InDesign as I talk about this because I want you to see it in live time. I'm going to get rid of this for just a minute. And the way you access your grid, so to set up a baseline grid as we're going to be talking about it, you're going to go into your grid preferences up at the top of your screen. Or I'm sorry, let's see. You click on InDesign. Let's see. That's not what I want. In 1 second. Grid preferences. Oh, edit. Okay. So we go into edit. We'll go to, see if it'll let me do it. I probably don't have any text yet, so I'll probably have to get that laid out. I know the only thing you're going to use the master for would probably be your header or your your header or your footer. So for the folio. So you could take that same typography. So I'll show you, that's a good question. You won't need it you can use it for other elements if you're like, hey, I'm getting the hang of this. I think I'm going to use it. You're welcome to use the master for other things, but you'll kind of only need it for the header or the footer. So here's the header. I'm going to kind of line it up with my margin page like that. So you've got the top and you've got the bottom, header and footer. And you'll probably want to put that on. I'm just kind of lining it up on that margin line like that, so it looks even. So this is the only reason why you would need one right now. You probably wouldn't need to add any, because whatever you add to this is going to apply to all the pages. So you kind of want to customize that as we get into the design. Okay, so we've got those elements. So now we've done the header and footer. That's done off our list, so I'll delete that. All right, let's go into our grid. Let's see here. I'm going to grab my type tool. Let me see if we can. All right, so if you go to InDesign and click on Preferences, you'll click on Grids. You can see that. And I'll type it in here for you. As you're following along. Okay, so I'm just going to talk really quickly through this and then I'll show you how to set up a baseline grid. So basically, when you set up a grid, if you go to your view and make sure that your grids and guides are on, you can, let's see, show baseline grid is what we'll want. So this is what I mean by lined notebook paper. This is the view of a baseline grid. I'll show you how to set one up in just a minute, but this is what it's supposed to look like, so you kind of get used to it. So when a grid is visible, there's a few things that you'll notice. The baseline grid covers the entire spread, so left to right, it runs off the page. But the document grid covers the entire pasteboard. So we're not going to talk about a document grid right now. The baseline grids and document grids appear on every spread and can't be assigned to any master. So basically, they're just there on every page. This is the view. It's more of a view. The document grid can appear in the front or behind all the guides, the layers and objects, but it just can't be assigned to any layer. So basically, it's kind of its own independent setting. It's kind of like zooming in and zooming out. It's just a view, a different kind of view. So this is what it looks like. All right, so now let's talk about how to set one up, okay? You go to InDesign, Preferences, click on Grids. You can set the color for your baseline grid. I like light blue because it's just like notebook paper. It's just the way I think, and so I'll keep it that way. You can use grid preferences to set up a baseline grid for the entire document. So this is what we're going to be doing. You'll once you have your dialog box up, your preferences box up, you can specify a baseline grid color. Like I said, you can choose whatever color you want. Just click on something that appeals to you. I like picking something that stands out against my text. And then for relative to, right here, top of page, you can specify whether you want the grid to start at the top of the page or the bottom of the page. I like doing it at the top of the page. And for start, up here, this value, type a value to offset the grid from either the top of the page or the top margin of the page. All right, and right now it's kind of off a little bit from my margin. But depending on the option that you choose from the relative to menu, if you have trouble aligning the vertical ruler to this grid, just start with a value of 0 if that makes it easier. And you'll kind of see what it does. But I'm going to do a 2 pica. We'll see if that helps. Okay, so here's the tricky part, and this kind of gets students sometimes. This bottom value, or I'm sorry, the increment every, needs to match the leading of your font. Okay, so once you format your font, you're putting your body text in, and you've got an 8-point font, and your leading is 12, the increment every needs to match your leading point of 12, okay? The value will depend on what your leading value is, so it just needs to match, because some students are like, it's not matching up, I've got my baseline grid set up, nothing's lining up, and that's because usually they forget to match the increment every value, okay? This view threshold will allow you to see once you've hit this percentage. So I like to lower it significantly. I just put like 20%. So no matter 20% and up of my zoom in or zoom out, this will allow me to see the baseline grid. So I just give it a very low value. Okay. We'll stop there before we go into more of how to structure things. So that's all you'll need to know for the grids right now. So we'll hit OK. We'll go in a few times just to make sure everything is aligned properly. If you want to toggle between the views, you can just hit W, and that will take away your grid lines, because sometimes it can get too busy for me and I just need to step back and see, what am I doing? So hitting W will help you toggle between the views, okay? Now, I'm going to turn off my grids and guides just for a minute. I'm going to hide the baseline grid so I can set up my columns of text. Now, what I'm going to do is grab my type tool, and I'm going to just draw. My columns of text are going to probably start quite low, so probably right here. And I'm going to draw 3 columns of text, or actually rather 6 columns of text. And I'm going to make sure they all start and end at the same point. If your smart guides are on, you'll notice how these green arrows are kind of locking things into place. That means you've aligned it perfectly horizontally and vertically, meaning they begin and end at the same place. So I'm going to do that again. Now, I don't want your text box to ever go in between those purple vertical lines. That represents your gutter. That means keep out. So we want elements to keep out of that gutter, especially text. So I'm just aligning it to the inside and the outside of these purple lines. And this margin line is going to help me keep things well within the page. Okay, so once you have all 6 columns of text laid out, we are going to attach them, link them together, so that when you place your content in one, it will flow it into all 6. Again, this is going to be a huge time saver, and when you make changes in one column, it will update all the other 6 columns. Whereas if you were to individually place text in each column, if you were to make changes or delete text, you'd have to go format each column of text every time you made a change. That would be super annoying and also inconsistent and not formatted correctly. So Jenny, are you following along? If you are, tell me if I'm going too fast. I'll slow down until you get to this point. Okay, you're good? All right. So now that you have your 6 columns of text laid out, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to click on the first one, and I'm going to zoom in here so you can see, kind of exaggerate this. There are anchor points on the corners of your boxes. I want this bigger anchor point right here. You see this bigger one right here? If I click on this one, and then click on my next column of text, you'll see this little play button up here, the top left. That means that it's linked. So the same thing, I'm going to click on this bottom anchor point. I'm going to click on this next column of text. Whoops. There we go. And this one's now linked. So I'm going to click on this bottom anchor point, and I'm just going to keep doing that to all the text. When you see that play button at the top left, that means you've linked them. Click on the bottom left, click again. Click on that bottom anchor point, click again. Yeah, I'll get back to the grids for sure. I'll do that for you in just a minute. So now this is all linked up. So when I put text into the first column, it will fill in all 6 columns with the text. So I'm just going to show you real quick what that looks like. So as you see that, how immediate that was, it just filled it all in. Now, when you are inserting your Word document after you've written your paper, what you're going to do that is you're going to go to File, and let's see, let's edit. Yeah, you'll just do paste, or you can do paste in place. You can copy and paste it, or you can do, I believe it's File will let you File, Open, and then you'll find your document and place it into those columns of text. So now that I have my columns of text laid out, now we're going to go over making sure that the grids are lined up. So I'm going to go back to my view and make sure grids and guides are set up. So I'm going to show baseline grid here. Now you'll notice that not all of my words are lining up with the bottom of my baseline grid. So if I zoom in here, you can see how the blue line's kind of going through some of my letters. It's not evenly lined up, and I want it all to be locked into place so it all runs along the baseline grid. So the way we're going to set this up is I'm going to format my text first. I'm going to give my body copy the size and the leading that I want it to have. I'm going to do 8-point font. Let's do Helvetica, because I'm writing about Helvetica. I'll do regular. Okay, so I'm going to add my content. My leading I'm going to do is going to be, let's do 11. Actually, I'll do 12 for my leading. 8-point font and 12. So now it's all matching because my leading value right here matches my grid value in preferences. So if I pull up the grid box, see how the increment every is 12, and I changed my grid, my leading to 12. Now there's no baselines running through my text. Everything's evenly placed within it. So Jenny wanted me to go over the inserting the grids again. You'll give it a start point, do top of the page. You could even do 3 picas if you wanted. Increment every will match whatever your font leading is. View threshold, I did about 20% so that you could see it at just about any value above 20%. And that's all that you need to know for the setting the grids up, okay? All right, so now that the grids are all lined up, you'll notice if I zoom in again, that they're not really lining up on the baseline, that blue part, and they really should be. So what I'm gonna do is zoom out here, and I'm gonna highlight all of my text boxes. And there's something that's called balance columns right up here. I'm going to click that, and that will balance them all, make sure they're evenly placed. And then I'm going to kind of highlight, I'm going to go within there. I'm going to click on my paragraph control settings. As you see this up here, top left, this little paragraph icon. I'm going to click that, and that kind of changes the settings up here. If I click on, right now you can see that what's highlighted is do not align to baseline grid. We don't want that selected, so we want to click on the one below it, align to baseline grid. It's this little column mark right here. By clicking that, now the text is shifted to the blue baseline. So now it's no longer hovering in the middle between the baseline, it's actually sitting on the line, just like you would notebook paper. So it's sitting properly on that baseline. So that is, whoops, that is what I'm going to be looking for. Number one, are all your columns of text lined up? Number two, are they snapped to the baseline grid? Are they lined up to the baseline grid? All right. And number three, do they end and begin at the same place? Now, I don't want to see this. Sometimes this is a common occurrence, is when someone's doing a paper and they leave this little gap here. Or maybe the bottom portion, let's see, there's uneven columns. All the text needs to be lined up properly on the same row and same line. If you need to grab more content, great, grab more. If you need to cut some content, that's okay too. Just make sure that you make sure everything is even and uniform. That's what we're going for here, okay? So that is how to set up those grids. All right, let's jump back to the slides real quick because we kind of scratched the surface. So basically, grids are your friends. I don't want you to get too intimidated. There are different types of grids like we talked about, but the baseline grid is the one that I really want you to focus on and set up in your document. You will be graded on this, and the InDesign document is required to be submitted with your PDF. I need to be able to check your baseline grids. Did you set up your master pages and those things? And I can't verify that if I don't have the InDesign documents. This is very important to include both documents when you upload, okay? There's something often called the 12-column grid. This is used for digital applications, and this gives you a lot of flexibility. I'll show you a visual of what this looks like. You won't really need to worry about this, but you'll see what a 2-page spread might look like with 3 columns right here. It kind of spreads out a little bit more. And I have a link here that will help you too when you're setting up your information. I'll post this in the announcements as well. But since Jenny, you're in the live feed, I'm going to give this link to you. This gives you a step-by-step, talks a little bit about how to use grids, but it also gives you the 5-step process to include your grids on your page. So hopefully that's helpful for you. All right, so why are grids important? Well, it just helps with the fluidity of content. It makes the text flow from letter to letter very nicely, word to word, line to line. I want everything to line up, paragraph to paragraph. Consistency is key here, and that's what you're really going to be graded on. How clean is your layout? Is everything the same size, the same format, same alignment? And I want you to consider font size. I want you to consider your tracking, your leading, even the color of the text. I really want you to focus on proper color. We'll talk about how to add pops of color in your layout. I would love to see color in your layout, but we're going to do it tastefully. I don't want to see colored backgrounds and then lots of white text or dark text on those colored backgrounds. We're just going to add subtle pops of color to the text, and it will be done very tastefully, and that will add some visual interest as well. Remember the 19 rules of typography we went over the last 2 weeks. You will be required to know those and graded on those. But rule 14, here's a quick reminder. You really want to clearly indicate paragraphs. Be careful not to upset the integrity or the visual consistency of the text. So by clearly indicating these paragraphs, just 2 of the common ways are either indenting or inserting additional space between the paragraphs. I'll show you what I mean. This seemed to be kind of a lot of students kind of got docked points on this because they they weren't doing it correctly. So let's look at these 3 paragraphs here for just a minute. Okay, so say this is my paragraph of text. Every paragraph break, you're going to want to give a return. Let's see. Like this. Okay, every paragraph break. I'm just going to kind of format this a little bit. Okay, and I don't want that widow, so that's for 1. So one thing you can do if you don't want the widow is you can change the tracking a little bit. So if I go into my character formatting controls and go find my tracking, let's see, I don't think it allows me to adjust it here. If you go to your window, type in tables, character, this will allow you to adjust the tracking just very little bit. Yeah, there you go. You don't want to do it more than 2 times just because it will, some will look squished and some won't. Just give the returns, but do not indent and return, okay? So don't indent and hit a return. You either do one or the other. So the return or no return, and then you do an indent. All right. So it's one or the other. That's rule 14. All right, so let's go back here. Back to our PowerPoint slides. Okay, let's talk about pull quotes. I'll show you how to include a pull quote in your final project. This is required, something interesting from the text. So you can pull a quote that's somewhere in your text that you quoted. You can pull, basically it's 1 or 2 sentences of something. It's not meant to be very long. In fact, short and sweet is what we want. But the pull quote serves as kind of visual aesthetics to the layout. So you want to use contrast techniques to pull out the quote. You don't want it to look the same. You don't want to use the same font or the same size or the same weight as what is already in the body text. We want to pull it out of the article, kind of like that example I showed you right here. They're using a bold, italic, and much larger font to pull the quote out. So right here in the far right column. And that's what we want to style. So make sure to have plenty of space around the pull quote text. Don't interrupt the text in an uncomfortable way. I don't want the pull quote to touch any of other elements. It needs to kind of be within that 3 column or that grid system that we've got set up. So let me show you how to do that really quick. And I apologize for going back and forth. I just want to talk about a concept and then show you how to do it so that you're familiar with it. Let me see. I can grab some content. So you've got your 3 columns laid out. I'm going to grab my type box and I'm going to pull a quote. Okay. So that is the pull quote. Now you can pull it from your article. It could maybe be a sentence or 2 that stands out. Pull quotes serve to be kind of an eye catcher. So if, when you're reading a magazine, pull quotes are usually like something that catches your eye within that article. And so you're going to want to pick the most interesting words, obviously. And so we'll grab this. I'm using a regular size 8-point Helvetica on my body text. So I want to do a bold, and I'll do a serif font for this, just so that it looks different. I'm adding contrast, serif and sans serif. Even though my article is on the font Helvetica, the majority of the article will be laid out in Helvetica font. But to create contrast, I really want to add a serif font to kind of stand out. So I'll do a bold italic, just like this. And pull quotes can either sit within, they can actually fit within the article like this. You just don't want a huge gap of space between it. And this one, I'm going to make the font a lot bigger, like that. I want it to stand out. So I can put it within there. I just want an even amount of space below it on the side. You could also do another technique where you have your pull quote in a different box, and we'll just move these two down. And I'll have it extend to 2 columns like this. And that's another way to add a pull quote. All right, so you could do it 2 different ways, or sometimes people put it in the middle of the columns. That gets a little trickier, but I would say just kind of place it somewhere where it will catch the eye and break up the text a little bit. This is where you could add some color. So you could make this, if we were going to do black and red as our color scheme, you could make this pull quote red and it will really pop from the rest of the article. Okay? So that is how you do a pull quote. Sometimes you can make the quotes a lot larger, you know, and then you can kind of format the rest of the text. Let's see. But that will, that's like another whole animal in itself. So I just recommend just doing this. Are there any questions so far? We've covered grids, the baseline grid. We've covered the grid system using 3 columns, 2, 3, 4 column grids. And we've covered how to use master pages by including your folio and your header on your magazine layout. So we've covered quite a bit of stuff. I'm going to let you play catch up. We're going to go ahead and go to our 10-minute break. When we come back, I'm going to show you how to do the artistic part of laying out the article and everything that you'll need to know for the final project. And we will go ahead and stop the share here. We'll go to our 10-minute break, and I will see you guys in just a few minutes. I do encourage you to work on the assignment, so if you have any questions when I get back, we can kind of go over that as well. Thanks, guys. All right, we are back and ready to start. Are there any questions before we jump right back in? Questions? All right. Well, if anytime you have questions, feel free to interrupt or just put it in the chat box and we'll address it. So let's talk about the CRAP principle designs. Also known as, people call it CRAP or CARP, but you want to build a better experience with these design principles. You know a good or a bad design when you see one, and we had our fair share looking at the discussions over the last 2 weeks, seeing our good designs, our bad designs. However, it's not always that you can objectively point out the qualities or flaws in a design. Sometimes it's the challenge, just something seems off, especially if you're not a designer or not used to analyzing things. So marketers and developers often find it challenging to come up with designs that work. So to do that, we use what's called the CRAP. It's a design principle given by Robin Patricia Williams. It stands for contrast, repetition, alignment, and proximity. And so we're going to go into that a little bit. Right there. And we're going to talk about these 4 design practices, and when applied together, they lead to really brilliant designs more often than not. And so this kind of is going to elaborate on the design practices individually, aiming to help you create better design and a better experience with your reader. So let's talk about that. Contrast and emphasis. Contrast, all you need to know is that it creates emphasis. Contrast is all about making distinct elements stand out. We don't want everything to stand out or nothing will stand out. Contrast is used to drive a user's attention to specific elements within a design. Pull quotes is a great way to add contrast. You make them different than the rest of the page. Why? Because we want them to read it. It's a short and simple way to create contrast and create something visually appealing. For a layman, contrast may just be limited to black and white or a similar combination of other colors, but there is a lot more to contrast than this. You can contrast with font size, with color, with placement, alignment. There's many, many different ways to create contrast, but besides differentiated colors, contrast can be established using different element types, shape, size, and more than that. So here's how you can apply different types of contrast in a design. First, let's talk about color, okay? I'm gonna show you something. I can pull it up. Okay, here is an example of bad contrast using complementary colors, colors that are too close on the color wheel. And these colors are dark on dark and they don't work well. You'll often hear me say, change the color of your background or change your font color. So this is just really hard on the eyes. But I'll show you an example of good contrast, where if you pick colors that are far apart on the color wheel, now you have some contrast. So light on dark or dark on light. That's kind of the idea here. All right, now I do want to preface this by saying having contrasting colors for multiple elements can make a design look really messy. So I say stick to 2 or 3 colors throughout and don't deviate, okay? Contrast is not just about using complementary colors. You really need to ensure that participating colors in a design don't strain the eyes, like I showed you before, the good and the bad example. So a quick way to know if your design has optimal contrast is by looking at its grayscale version that you can create. And this can easily be done by using any editing tool or Photoshop or anything. And I'll show you what that's supposed to look like. So here is an example of good contrast, the one on the left, and a bad contrast, the one on the right. They took the ad on the left in the color and changed it to the grayscale, black and white, or I guess it's in a grayscale. And you can see that it reads well, the background's not overpowering, text pops, everything stands out as it should. This is a good layout. The one on the right is a bad layout in terms of color because they use such dark colors that nothing really stands out or pops. So everything's dark, and so when you convert it to grayscale, you don't have anything that really stands out. It kind of blends in together. So this is an example of good and bad contrast in terms of color. All right, we can talk about size. We won't get into that, but obviously contrast can be maintained between discrete elements, especially text, using a difference in their sizes. That's very important. That's why we want subheaders to look a little larger than the body text, and we want the headline to be the largest element on the page, and so on, okay? You can also use shape. Contrast and shapes of elements really helps users' guides attention. It breaks monotony in designs, and you can use that in your artwork as you design your layout. Here's an example of using shapes. Just incorporating elements with dissimilar shapes to illustrate information is kind of a neat way to do it. Okay, the next thing is repetition. Repetition is just how you maintain consistency in a design. It's how you create unity. It helps users or readers familiarize with the way that information is presented to them. So for instance, bullet lists use repetition of circular dots to present information. The repetition of those bullets or those dots can help readers scan and read the list quickly. That's a great way to create repetition. Additionally, the repetition of elements is what gives an identity to a design. Repetition can be practiced with the color, shape, texture, size, and other attributes of elements in a design. So let's take an example. I can show you a badly designed website. Look at that. There is no consistency. There is no repetition. Everything is kind of doing its own thing, and it just does not work. It's an example of a poor layout. Now let's contrast that with something that does do well and follow the rules and use repetition quite often. Right here, fonts are kept the same. They use bullets as repetition. Images are the same size. Headlines are the same size. Everything's very clean and orderly. And that's what we're talking about when it comes to repetition. It may just contain plain text and a few images, but the repetition of the font type, font size, font color, style of the images, all this looks neat and easy to read. So you really want to make sure you're incorporating repetition. Let's talk about alignment for just a second. Alignment dictates the way every element is placed in a design. All right, and I'm going to show you an example because I think this is a really good one in terms of shapes, but we can apply this to text as well. In terms of alignment, with alignment, no element in a design is positioned arbitrarily. It's not randomly placed. Each element visually connects to other elements, and this leads to really cohesiveness in a design. The two basic kinds of alignment that you'll find are edge alignment and center alignment. Edge alignment naturally positions elements against a margin that really matches up with their outer edges. So right here you can see these edges are lined up perfectly with that red arrow, kind of like the baseline grid. That's what that does for us. It helps us align the rows of text evenly and correctly. Now, center alignment, you'll often see, centers the center of objects instead of the edges of objects. So you can see in this example, the center of objects are aligned instead of the edges. Okay. Now for text, different styles of alignment are left justified, right centered, and left and right alignment are the most common among them. You could do a centered alignment. That can work when there's not a great amount of text, but if you have a lot of text, you really want to stick with the justification. Justification works fine when the text has long line length, small font size, and shorter words, but narrow columns and long words can really pose readability issues with the justification. So this example, I'll show you, is what I'm talking about. We don't want this. Okay, it's just carelessly justified alignment. So we really want to make sure we either left align something or right align something. We don't want to use that justified part. All right. The last one is proximity. This one's important. I'll show you a simple example as I talk about this. Okay, here's an example of proximity. All right, so the principle of proximity states that elements that are associated with each other should be placed close together, right? If they're spread out, we are to assume that they're not together. The application of proximity, especially in web design, can lead to better user experience. And so, or in layouts of print, it can be a better reader experience. In amateur, any amateur designer might try to utilize the complete real estate of a design, trying to spread elements evenly throughout. But we really want to work on grouping. Such a design will make it difficult for anyone to determine the elements that are related to each other and those that are not. So this can be a very poor design if we do that. So look at these two and tell me which one has the better proximity layout. Both cards contain the same information, you'll notice, just the way it's presented is different. And the information on the card on the left has been distributed evenly, but it's the card on the right that has the information placed with better structure. The related information points have been grouped together. So we can see the name or the company, the address, that's all grouped. Then phone number, contact information, that's all grouped. Whereas if it was just placed on the page without any rhyme or reason, it will look disconnected. You'll hear me say, oh, that looks disconnected, or it doesn't look unified. That's what I'm talking about, okay? All right, so putting these 4 principles, design principles together can drastically improve the quality of a design. So I really want you to use these principles as a checklist to ensure that your design offers a great experience for anyone reading your article, all right? And it's easier said than done, I realize that. We're not gonna get into that. But here's another example of contrast. See that? The elements of contrast on this page are what? Well, it's color. For one, you've got the pop of color. The yellow acts as a contrasting color. That pull quote acts as contrast. It's a bigger, bolder font. And let's see what else is contrast. Even the white font against that dark background is contrast. Okay, in terms of repetition, let's look at an example for repetition. Repeating similar elements. Do you see any repetitious elements here? The shapes are used as repetition. So the circles, even the dotted lines. It's also, its other role is acting as kind of the visual part. It's creating that art, that artistic look of the article. It's also adding something to it. Also repetition in color. You see that drop cap is the same color as the circle above it. That's kind of neat. And they're pulling colors from the picture. So they're not random colors, they're just complementary colors from the picture. All right, in terms of alignment, this is achieved by making all the elements visually equal on all sides, which is kind of easier said than done. Let's look at the example on the left here. What alignment are they using on this left-hand side here? They're using a right alignment, right? All the headline, the subheadline, even the intro paragraph, the byline, this is all right aligned. So because they're using a right alignment, it creates balance. And the one on the left, they used a left justified, or sorry, the one on the right, they use a left justified alignment. So this is an example of creating proper alignment. Okay, we talked about proximity. It's just another fancy word for grouping things, making sure things that are related stay grouped together, things that are not related spread out. Here's an example. What do you see? What elements are grouped in this visual example here? Pictures are grouped. The images, even the typographic characters here are as well. They're kept close together so that there's no mistake that they belong in the same row. Even the columns of text can be considered grouping, proximity. they're part of the same article, so they're grouped together. Okay, so the more you see, the more you know. So look on Google Images for article layouts, magazine article layouts, find something you like, seek inspiration. I've said this before, I don't care if you recreate for practice. I want you to learn from the masters, people who've been there, done that, obviously caught your eye with their layout. So you want to kind of practice how they did it so that you can kind of see, kind of get the feel for how to do it on your own. I want you to explore and experiment with this final project. This is meant to have fun. You do have a lot of creative freedom to create a look that you want, but I want you to have fun with the assignment above all. Following the rules can get kind of tricky. So, all right, we're going to stop with the lecture here. I have a few videos to share later, but we're going to jump into the rest of the design. And once I finish this, we'll see if we have time for the videos. All right, so I've showed you how to do a pull quote. I've showed you how to lay out your article. One thing you will need to do is do a drop cap. And drop cap is where you just highlight the first letter of your first paragraph and you will give it a dropped cap. And you can find that under your character formatting controls. I think a 3-line drop cap is great. I'm using the red and black color scheme, so I'm going to make this red to stand out and complement my pull quote. Okay. And if I wanted to add some more visual interest, I could put subheaders here. And by doing a subheader, I'd probably want to make it to add contrast, do a bold, and then do probably a 2-point difference. And then if I'm going to do that, I'm going to just make it red so that it also kind of breaks up the boring, monotonous black text here. Okay. Another subheader and another one. All right, so that's how I kind of peppered it with some subheaders. Based off my body text, everything is done here. I'm going to look at my checklist here. I've got my subheads. That is optional, so you won't need that necessarily, but I think it adds to the visual part of your article. We use the body copy, so I can delete that. I use the pull quote, so that's also can be checked off. Okay, now let's talk about the using the lowercase and uppercase letters. I showed you an example of a layout that we're going to kind of copy. We're going to mimic. We're going to recreate it. Okay. This one I thought was really cool. So this is what we're going to do. I'm going to move it over to the side so that I can see it. I'm going to take off my baseline. Now that I have my text laid out, I don't need the baseline view anymore. So I can just hide it. So that kind of clears things up a little bit. All right. Now I'm going to grab my text box. Again, I'm going to use my margin line as kind of that starting point. And for the first column or two, and draw this box here. And we're going to make sure this is in the font I'm writing about, which is Helvetica. I'm going to do a big bold. Okay. And I'm going to make this quite large. The headline I want large, and I want it to, because it's going to be acting as my visual component, I really want to make sure that I highlight this element here. All right, so I've got the Helvetica here. And I'm going to go to type, create outlines. By doing this, I won't be able to edit it with the type tool anymore, but this will definitely, I'm going to ungroup this. I'm going to right click and see if it'll let me ungroup it. I'll grab my direct selection tool here. I'm going to grab my corner points. I want this to kind of go off the page a little bit. There we go. All right. So I've got that. Make it a little bigger. Perfect. I didn't want anything in my gutter line right there, so I was just trying to align it. All right, next I need to type out the rest of the word, Vedica. And again, that needs to be in Helvetica. And I'm going to do a regular. I did a bold on it, but I'm going to do a regular and just make it large for contrast. Okay, I'm going to rotate this box. If I hold down Shift, it will lock it when it turns a full 90 degrees. And I'm going to make sure this eye is lined up with the base of my L, like this. I kind of move this down a little bit. Okay, and I could even make this a little smaller. Move this. Okay. And now now I'm going to just grab a line here and I'm going to hold down Shift so that I keep it straight, and I'm going to have it go across both pages. I drew that line and I'm going to give it a black stroke, and I'm going to give it a weight, the width of the eye, which is going to get a little tricky because you're going to have to eyeball it. There we go. Make sure it's aligned properly. Okay. And then this is where I can put all the uppercase and lowercase letters or characters. So this is where you'll type them in. I'm giving a space between each one. All right, and this too is going to be in Helvetica because I'm featuring the actual layout. So I'm going to do this in regular. And you can adjust the tracking of these letters if you wanted to spread them out for contrast. I'm going to take this text box and make sure they start at this baseline here, or this black line. And I'm going to extend it. I'm going to also increase the size a little bit, probably about 15, and then I'll just have this spread out to the very end. There we go. And then I'm going to keep the same formatting in this text box. So I'm just going to kind of copy and paste, position it underneath. And then instead of rewriting these, I'm just going to go to type, change case, lowercase. So now it will change it to lowercase. Kind of neat, huh? Now it won't line up exactly, and that's okay. You can adjust the tracking even more if you wanted to extend it. One of these I'm going to have in red because I want to add some contrast, like that. Or I could even do the lowercase ones in contrast as well. That kind of adds some visual contrast. Or I can change the Vedica to red. Oops. The actual text, not the box. It's kind of a neat way to do it. It's up to you what you want to do to add color. And then we'll just need the figures from 0 to 9, right? The numbers. I'm just giving a space between each one. Again, this is going to be, I'll keep the font size. I'm going to get rid of the tracking though. These ones I don't need to be as spread apart. Rotate it, hold down Shift. And get rid of the tracking on this one. Okay. That looks right. It's lined up with the base of that V. So if I were to grab a ruler, there's the base of the V, and there's the base of my text. So everything lines up just right. All right, so I like this. That's my art. That's my artwork there. Don't be afraid of this white space. That's okay. You could add, this could be a great place if you wanted to add a, your portrait illustration right there. If you wanted to put it in between, just make it small, or if it was a little wider, you can put your artwork there. That's okay. Let's see what else. I think that's it. We've got our, we did our headline, and then we need our byline. So our byline is going to go underneath our headline. So this will be by Mrs. Woodland. This will also be, oops. This is going to be in Helvetica. And I'm going to do regular, but the byline needs to be much smaller than everything else. So it doesn't need to be quite as big as the headline. I'm just going to align it right under here. Okay, so that stands out. You could put an intro if you wanted to. Let's see, what else? I think that's it. So we've got our name. I used a bold. I used regular. I used my headline is my graphic. So this is a great clean layout based off of the Helvetica font. So this is all you'll need to know for the design portion. Are there any questions? I've included all the elements that you will need in your article. Any questions? Okay. If there are no questions, we're going to go over how to create your PDF, because the PDF needs to be in a spread. This is important, so listen up. If you go to File, Export, you'll want to save it as DES 113. I don't know what how you're supposed to save it, but you'll put your name, your assignment, hit save, and then it will bring up a PDF dialog box. You'll want to click on smallest file size. You don't want it to be very large because it'd be quicker upload for you. And then if you click on, let's see, you can click on range 2 and 3 and click on spreads. This is important. This will allow you to display your article, your PDF as a spread instead of separate pages. Okay, and you will be graded on this. You'll get doc points if you don't do it as a spread. So that's important. Then you don't need to worry about marks and bleeds, though you can click the marks for all printer marks. It looks a little bit more professional. But other than that, main thing is we want that box underneath the range to be spreads, okay? Hit export. That'll maybe give you a few notifications. Hit OK, and then you've got your spread. So, and your spread will look a lot like this. There's 2 pages side by side. So that's how your PDF is supposed to look, okay? All right, so that is the design portion. We're gonna go ahead and shift gears real quick. I'm gonna go back to the slides. And I did have a video for you guys to watch that I think is important. So I'm gonna pull this up. Real quick, give me just a minute. So that's just one video that I'll share. Let's go to, there it is. Make sure it's pulled up.
Okay.
What is a graphic design grid? A grid you might think of as graph paper or lots of lines on a page dividing things up into small segments. But in graphic design, a grid is basically an organizational system that you use to help organize elements on your page and maintain unity and consistency. There are different kinds of grids and different ways of using them. And here we're going to take a look at a website that shows some of the examples of grids you can use and also the importance of deciding upon a grid at the beginning of your project and sticking to it as you place your design elements. So here I have a website called designersinsights.com. It's worth a look through to look at the different options that it has, but this page covers, I think, the idea of layout grids in a very simple and easy to understand way. And they mentioned that there are two main kinds of layouts, vertical or landscape. Now, I'd like to expand on that a little bit. Vertical is also known as portrait. So if you see the term portrait, you'll know that it's vertical. And the term landscape also means horizontal. So portrait and landscape, vertical and horizontal. So there are two basic kinds of pages that you work on. If you're working in print, you'll very often be working on vertical pages and layouts. If you're doing work for the screen, such as for websites or other screen-based applications, you'll probably be more concerned with a horizontal layout. So there are different kinds of grids that exist to help you organize your pages. And generally, in graphic design, grids are referred to by the number of columns that they utilize, okay? They're not broken up as much into horizontal rows as they are into vertical columns. So here we have examples of 6 vertical pages using different kinds of grids. The one column grid fills the page with it fills the margins with imagery and graphic elements. 2 columns divides it into 2 columns. Now, these columns don't always have to be the same width. That's something that's good to remember. These examples do show equal width columns, but columns do not have to be equal, as long as there is a certain consistency throughout, say, a multi-page document. If you have one wide column and a narrower one on one page, it would be good to repeat that set up on the subsequent pages, again, for consistency. So we have 2 different versions of the 2-column grid here, and then we have 3 versions of the 3-column grid down here on the bottom row. Now, I recommend, generally speaking, that a 2 or a 3-column grid is the best way to go. It breaks up the space such that you can utilize it in many different ways. It will maintain the best readability for text, and it's really very versatile. Now, here's the idea about a grid. You want to adhere to it with your text and with headlines, with imagery, but then you can break out of it now and then for visual appeal. Look at this example down here, this one. The gray squares, which indicate imagery, they span a couple of columns, and this one goes to the edge of the page. It bleeds off. This one spans 2 columns. The text itself maintains the 3-column grid. So we have a nice balance of 2 and 3-column spanning here with imagery and text. And you'll notice that the headline of this example goes across all 3 of the columns without regard for the columns themselves. So that's breaking out a little bit, but it still all works together. And you'll notice that in all of these cases, with the exception of this bleeding off here and the silhouette of the woman, in every case, the outside margins are honored. Okay, there's a little bit of breakout here, but that's good because this is an image of a skateboarder and it wants to break out a little bit. So the idea of grid use is you adhere to those guidelines with the important pieces, and then you make conscious decisions about when to break out of the grid.
Okay, so we'll stop there. And I'm going to show one more. So bear with me. not be able to show that one. There's one more.
It's always a good idea to review basic design principles when you're working with not only typography, but basically anything that you use in graphic design, such as imagery or graphic shapes. In this case, I'm going to focus more on the use of typography as they work with these basic design principles. So I'm going to give you a simple example of each of these 9 principles and how you can think about them when you're working with your text layouts. They are, of course, unity, variety, balance, rhythm, emphasis or focal point, contrast, breathing room, or sometimes called negative or white space, proportion, and scale. The first one I'm going to show is unity. And I have very simple shapes here, and I have some Greeking text to show you examples of how a layout can bring together disparate elements to become unified. And what's working here as far as the layout goes is the way that these elements are aligned. That's what brings these into good unity. Of course, I'm using the same typeface throughout the piece, and that also adds to unity. But I'm pulling these ruler guides down here to show you how different elements are aligned on this piece here. And the most important ones are the 4 margins around the edges. The title and the left side of the paragraph here, and the left side of this gray bar, which could be a photograph or it could be just a basic shape, really serve to bring it together because they're aligned nicely. You can see that there's alignment on the bottom and on the right as well. Now, the darker gray square here it's the top of it is aligned with the baseline of the word unity, the title, but you could also extend it to the top of this gray, lighter gray square if you wanted to align it with the top of the title. So you do have a little leeway there. But regardless of which you choose, the fact that these are aligned really tightly and nicely serve to give it a good unity and working well together. We can even get away with not having a straight edge on this paragraph. There's a ragged edge here, and that's okay because the outside elements are nicely and tightly lined up and serve to work well together. So that is one way you can make unity work in your favor. Variety is another design principle, and these gray squares could indicate paragraphs of text. They could be text or imagery, whatever. But the thing that stands out, of course, is the variety of that red shape in the layout there. Now, that could be text set in a different color. It could be a red bar with, say, white text inside of it to be a variety, give variety to the layout of black text on a white background, for instance. It could also be a nice way to separate this third rectangle on the right from the other 2 on the left. Sometimes you have a separate piece of text which is a different topic and you want to separate it from the others yet still take up the same amount of space. So putting a variety element in there, like a different color or a different font, something to break it up, gives visual interest to the page. And you'll get the hang of how to work with variety the more that you do it. A lot of these things take some time to develop, but the more you practice with them, the easier they will become, and you'll start to see ways to make them happen. Balance is the next principle here. And you'll notice that I have a series of rectangles on this page. Again, they could be text, they could be a combination of text and imagery, but they're illustrated here by the color that I've set these in. The largest rectangle is the lightest color, okay? But it is balanced by the smaller rectangle because the smaller one is a darker color. So even though the larger one is bigger, it still balances nicely because it's lighter, but it balances the smaller one quite well. Then we have the third element of the green repeated squares on top of the rectangle on the right there. And these are much brighter than the others, yet they're the smallest. So because they're brighter, their small size helps keep them in balance. So keep in mind that color and size can work to your benefit when you're trying to balance things. You can have something larger and it can be lighter, and the smaller element can be darker or brighter, and you'll get a good balance that way. And of course, alignment always helps to achieve the unity and also helps with a sense of balance. Rhythm is the next principle. Now, rhythm, here's a secret. The way to get a good sense of rhythm in any element you use, whether it be visual or typographic, is repetition. Repetition is what creates the rhythm. Okay, and I have repetition in each of these two words here. The word sail is repeated 5 times in different colors, different tones, so that it sets up a fairly smooth rhythm, but there's a progression there. It almost seems like you start out shouting the word sail.
Okay, so we're going to end there right before we close. So these are just some introductions to the CRAP design principles. Hopefully this makes a little bit more sense, gives you some more visuals, but I want your main focus to be the final project. And if you have any questions, please email me. This is our last week to get in our week 3 late work so that it can count. Again, this typeface portrait illustration should be really simple. Don't overthink it. If you need to get it in, do it now. But don't focus on late work and then miss the final project. The final project is 3 times as much as these other projects are. So make sure that you really work on the final project. If you need help, come to the multi-session on Wednesday. I'll be there from 6:30 to 8:30 Pacific time. The time is posted in the syllabus and on the course homepage. And then this recording will also be up, so check out. You can rewind it, fast forward it, whatever you need to do to get to, to speed up the process a little bit. Hopefully these steps helped you, and this showed you kind of a basic visual of how to lay out the article. If you need any help other than the multi-session and tonight's lecture, you can go visit the Student Success Center or any other multi-session. The schedule is posted in the announcements. Please make sure you do your daily checkpoints, get those in. I know some of you are missing those. And just get the late work in so that we can, so you never have to take this class again. Some of you are so close to passing, and I know that just turning in a few assignments will really help push you over the edge. So thank you for joining me tonight. Good luck on everything, and I will see you guys on Wednesday.